working memory, flexible thinking, inhibition, control, right? Those are the three areas that make up executive functioning. And how do we think about thinking for teenagers who are intellectually gifted, who are neurodivergent, and who have an inherently destabilized self-conception? Because that's what being a teenager is. It is the period of development in which your self-conception is basically in a perpetually destabilized state. It is very, very difficult for a person ages 12 to 18 to have a stable self-conception. And that sort of defines our role, right? How can we guide teenagers through thinking about themselves and their own thinking, which is not something that they are necessarily encouraged to do societally, and it's definitely not something that they're going to do naturally or organically by themselves, because they aren't in the sort of developmental slot where that begins to happen. And in fact, that doesn't really begin to happen in earnest for another 10 years. And so it's this idea of these students in this very specific moment, how can we guide them through this thinking? So when we're talking about working memory, flexible thinking, or cognitive flexibility, you'll see both terms used often. And then inhibition control, which, you know, anytime you're talking about a teenager and inhibition control, you kind of got to laugh, and then you have to do the work. But it's very, very difficult. It's sort of the moment in time where that in particular is going to be difficult for our young people. So what is working memory? And please know, as I go through these things, I know many folks on this call have read entire books on these things, you know, are very, very aware of these things. I include them because so often these terms are thrown around and taken for granted. And so sometimes they really do take on different meanings depending on who's using them and how they're talking about them. So when I'm defining these things, I'm defining them for our conversation today. And you'll notice the definitions are not particularly medical. That is intentional. It's supposed to be very accessible, because in many ways we are mirroring the language that we would want to be using with our teenagers as we talk about these things, right? Because we do need to be talking about these things in, you know, very specific detail with them. And how do you talk to someone who's 12 to 18 really actually doesn't change very much. Sometimes I actually think it's helpful to think as if you are speaking to a younger person. But it's how do we talk about these things with them? So I've definitely strayed away from more academic definitions or more medical definitions, and to useful definitions. Okay, so working memory. Working memory is the small amount of information that can be held in mind and used in the execution of cognitive tasks. And in contrast with long-term memory, the vast amount of information that we sort of use throughout our lives, or that is saved, is obviously long-term memory. So it's a very small amount of information that you are using in a given task. Let me just admit a few more people really quickly. Flexible thinking or cognitive flexibility. I actually think it's good to think about these things as two things, as a set of two different skills. The first skill being sort of flexible thinking, but the second and often more important skill set is actually set shifting, which is not a term. People love to talk about flexible thinking, but they hardly ever talk about set shifting. And set shifting is actually often the thing that is more in play in academic tasks in particular. Flexible thinking is often more in play in day-to-day life, relationships, and things like that. So flexible thinking is the ability to cognitively think about something in a different way. A good way of thinking about it is one's ability to have a problem and come up with multiple solutions, and then look at those different solutions and select which is best, right? What's going to fit or benefit the individual the most in that moment. Set shifting or task shifting is exactly what it sounds like. It's the ability to unconsciously or consciously shift attention between one task and another. And it obviously involves executive functioning. It's an aspect of executive functioning. That is often what students are doing when they are doing complex academic work. Complex academic work almost always necessitates set shifting. And so it's definitely something we focus on as we are supporting executive functioning. And then the last the last aspect is inhibition control, or what is meant, by inhibitory control, which is what we're asking our students, our teenage students, basically to be displaying every moment of every day. The inhibition control demands on a teenager are particularly high at a moment of natural development when they are particularly low. And if you add certain aspects of neurodivergence, that can be even more challenging. Though I do want to note, really, truly, all adolescents are struggling often a lot with inhibition control. And yes, it can be more pronounced, or it can be pronounced in particular ways, especially around ADHD or on the spectrum. And, sort of in times of higher stress, oftentimes we'll see, our young people who are in a menstrual cycle, there will be moments in the menstrual cycle where the inhibition control is particularly compromised. And so it just takes a really high level of awareness of like knowing where your teen is at to sort of understand where they are in this inhibition cycle. So inhibitory control describes the suppression of goal irrelevant stimuli and behavioral responses. Mr. Li is behind me, he just walked in. And we talk about response inhibition being the ability to suppress a motor response, and then also attentional inhibition. And they are two different things. And obviously attentional inhibition is what we are going to maybe focus a little bit more on. But I do think it's really important to be aware of sort of the physical life of your teenager, because if you are noticing a lot of motor response, a lot of sort of difficulty inhibiting motor responses to things, that can often be a display of heightened stress or exhaustion, or a combination of the two. So it is important to keep an eye on the motor response inhibition, but obviously we talk about attentional inhibition far more when we're talking about completing schoolwork. One thing I just want to note for everyone, I have chosen to do this presentation looking at the three portions of executive functioning, the three main tenets of executive functioning, rather than classifying executive functioning according to ADHD, autism spectrum, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. And oftentimes when we look at literature, that is how it is done. You will see how to support executive functioning for ADHD, or how to support executive functioning for a specific LD. And I think that is great. I think that's certainly a legitimate way of looking at these things. But as a parent in this community, one thing that you sort of, I think, notice very early on is that these classifications aren't always super clear cut. And there is a lot of overlap. And all of these different things manifest in different ways on an individual basis. So by looking at it organized by its tenets, the information remains relevant and hopefully helpful no matter sort of the individual, because all of these things are expressed very, very differently depending on all types of, even depending on where the individual is at that moment, it can change drastically. So by thinking about it as working memory, flexible thinking and set shifting, and inhibition control, those three categories can help guide us in our conversations with teens, in our sort of way of thinking about the different places where we can provide support. And I also think it's a really good reminder to not try and do all of it at one time, right? Because if you're thinking of working memory is a huge aspect of processing, right? Flexible thinking, cognitive flexibility, another huge thing. Inhibition control, same. So if we can really focus on what we're trying to support the individual with at any given moment, we can sort of stay away from the temptation to try and support everything all the time, all at once, and in doing so, usually not support much of anything. Right now, it would be my instinct right now to ask if anybody has any questions. Probably just because I'm used to teaching class and I would never go through this much information without providing a question break. But I think for our timing, we're gonna keep going. If you have a question, please put it in the chat. It'll sort of get memorialized, and we definitely will get to it. Okay. Okay. Thank you. How do we support working memory? Working memory, we covered sort of what it is. This is one of my favorite quotes from a man who's been doing this work for a very long time. I wish I should get it printed on a t-shirt at this point. Kids often truly believe that they'll remember information later on, so they don't write it down. And in certain situations, they will adamantly refuse to write it down, right? They are so certain that they will remember information later on that they don't memorialize it, they don't write it down, they don't take note of it. One of the most important things that we can do for young people is talk to them about reasonable working memory expectations of themselves. So many teenagers believe that they can keep every deadline for every project they're doing in their head. They think that they can sort of keep things in mind and that is enough. And it's just not the case. So the first sort of step, I think, often in talking to young people is, what are realistic expectations that you can have for yourself for how much information you can keep in your short-term memory at any given time, And the answer is really not very much. And so that's the first sort of step, I think, is framing it realistically. And not just with the lens of neurodivergence, but really for all individuals. What is an actual realistic expectation of your short-term memory in this extremely stimulating society that we have, with everything going on, with all of the distractions and all of sort of the demands of modern life? What is a reasonable expectation of self? And I think that just side note, I think that could be helpful for adults to just sort of check in with themselves and how much are you actually demanding of yourself when it comes to short-term memory? How much information are you unloading into a system that you can refer back to later on? And it's a good conversation, I think, to have with anyone. So ultimately, all of the suggestions, all of the ways that we can support working memory is experimental. And I want to stress that, because with working memory, really, I think more than the other two, with working memory in particular, you have got to go through an experimental phase to figure out what is working best for that individual. And the single most important thing for any approach to supporting working memory is that it be of the individual that is being supported. So, for example, if you create a checklist of a situation, of any task, and hand it to someone else, that checklist is going to be significantly less effective than if the individual who's expected to do the task creates the checklist for themselves. Because the process of identifying what needs to be on the checklist and the order in which it needs to be on the checklist and what is most important is actually often the most essential part of the task. So if that task isn't being done by the individual who then has to execute, one, it's just inherently more alienating, but also it's actually less effective. So sitting down with your teen and guiding them through, sure, for the first couple times, but obviously they're going to build autonomy. They're going to be able to do this, more and more independently. But just having them identify, okay, what are the things that need to go on the checklist? What needs to happen in order for this task, project, paper, whatever it is, to get completed? What are the steps? What order do the steps need to be in? What do you have to do before you can move on to the next step? Those questions are often the most important information to identify, because once you have identified those things, it's like following a recipe, right? It's like following steps, but you have to identify what the ingredients are and what it is that you're trying to make, right? So definitely one thing I always want to stress is the teens should be making the checklist that they're using. The teens should be driving that process. Developing routines is really important because it actually takes some of the stress of working memory off. There are certain things that you as a human being want to be able to do on autopilot. We often joke that the best tool you can get to support executive functioning is a bowl. And the reason that the best tool you can get to support executive functioning is a bowl is because it's a place for the teen to put their keys, their phone, any loose money, an ID that they need, a Metro card that they need, those types of things. Just having a set place, having a bowl. When you walk into the apartment, do you always do the same 3 things in the same order to make sure that your stuff is where you need it on autopilot? And the reason the on autopilot is so important is they do have such great demands on their thinking that to the degree to which you can make those things rote, all of that rote, the more you can make those types of things rote, the lower the demand of the actual working memory is to do those things. This one feels very awkward to a lot of families, and I get a lot of resistance for this in particular. And I want to endorse it. I want to fully endorse it. And that is to actually physically practice working memory skills, like physically doing it like a sport. So if you set up a little table where your important stuff goes, actually practice using it. If you set up a filing system on your computer for all of your different information, actually practicing how to use it in a no stake situation. So you're not doing it for any particular outcome. You are just doing it basically to make it muscle memory, right? So that the next time you do it, you have to give a little less attention to doing it. And the time you do it after that, you have to give it even less attention. Until finally, those types of rote things are actually reducing your overall stress and reducing the overall stress on working memory. Periods of great change are particularly tough on working memory, and that's especially true for individuals who are neurodivergent. Experiment with various ways of remembering information. The most effective way for one person to do that could not work at all for the person to their right. And that the longer I do this, I feel the more true that becomes. And so the individual really experimenting with various ways of chronicling and remembering information is so important. And I would add for this age range in particular, experimenting with various ways that they will be comfortable taking with them to university. So if we are experimenting with various ways of remembering information and we are doing it in a way that that individual would never want to use in university, drop it. Let's try and go to a different technique, a different app. Apps are incredibly helpful with working memory, and I feel like every month a new better app comes out. Experimenting with bullet journaling for some of our students. I have one student whom we tried every app under the sun, and it turned out actually physically bullet journaling was the key for them. And that was the thing that they really enjoyed. And that was the thing that they liked to do. And this is a student who loves to use different types of pens and loves to use different types of ink and loves to make things really artistic in the presentation. And once that bullet journaling started, it just took off. I could hand that to another one of my students and they would look at me like I had 3 heads because they would never want to do bullet journaling. It's essential to reduce multitasking. This is, I think, a particularly hard thing for us to model for our teens because we as adults are often so dedicated to multitasking, right? We live our entire lives as a multitask. So we can often be particularly bad at modeling for our teens how to stop multitasking and actually give our attention fully to the one thing we are doing at that time. But reducing multitasking is absolutely essential. And I would put it out there that, more and more sort of developmental studies demonstrate that spending long portions of your day in a multitasking mode is actually antagonistic to long-term memory and to actually building a knowledge base. So for our students who are in a period of, huge amounts of learning, it's essential that they can dedicate themselves fully to the task at hand. And unfortunately, with technology, the technology that they're using, they're being trained to do the exact opposite. Cognitively, they are being trained to keep attention on many things at all times and sort of divide the attention and further divide the attention. And we're trying to go in the opposite direction, which is why limiting screen time is so essential. And I'm a big advocate. Okay, so this next one, you're going to hear me say for all aspects: working memory, inhibition control, and flexible thinking. And that is that at this point, there is copious amounts of information supporting a mindfulness practice. And I know that I say this outright. I know I sound like every neurodivergent podcast. I feel like all of the big ones, all, Big Brain, Think Fast, like all of the major podcasts about neurodivergence have all recently had, an episode about meditation and mindfulness and the place of mindfulness in these different practices. But it is, that there is, the research is there to back it up at this point. Helping our teens to build a mindfulness practice can look a lot of different ways. It can look like going for a walk. It can look like, sitting down in a nice, pretty, we've got a gorgeous park right here, sitting down, facing the water, taking 20 minutes to, clear your mind and breathe deeply and be aware of your surroundings and kind of turn off. The more we can encourage them to see that as an important part of their day, the more they can have the benefits of a mindfulness practice. And for someone who is neurodivergent, just cannot recommend enough.
Yeah, students are always in this panic or this stage of, I need to do this. I don't have time if I don't do this, or I have to do this. And then if we give them time in the day during, like, let's say their free period or their lunch period, or at home where they could sit down and relax for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, not even, and they would say, I play video games to relax. Nothing. Just let them relax for 15 minutes, and that'll give them that quiet time to reflect. And your mileage may vary depending on every student. Every student will differ. However, it is a good way to practice mindfulness. It's not always meditation, as Ms. Coleman said. It can be just reflecting in silence and not having to do any necessary poses.
Yeah. And I'm so glad that Mr. Li brought up video games, because I do want to say a lot of our students equate, doom scrolling with not doing anything. And they will sometimes spend, hours on their phone or their computer, and that is their break time. I think it's essential to realize that that is in many ways the opposite of what cognitively they need to actually get back to a place where they're not overly taxing their processing. And, just really talking them through the idea that, being on your phone for 2 hours in your bed is not actually the same as a mindfulness practice. One thing I do want to note, for some of our students, especially us folks in the ADHD crew, and folks on the spectrum as well, 5 minutes to start is going to feel like a lot. And then I want to acknowledge that's not going to be easy. 5 minutes of a real mindfulness practice for a young person with a very active mind is a good place to start. There's a real demand in sitting and clearing the mind for 5 minutes. In an ideal world, which is not the world we live in an ideal world, the practice would build up to about 20 minutes a day. Whatever that practice looks like, you start to see a really significant jump in benefit when you are getting close to the 20-minute mark. That's what you kind of want to build up to, but it might take years to build up to that 20 minutes. You might, for some folks, it's going to take weeks, for some take months, and for some folks, they will spend years sort of getting to the 20-minute mark. But that is where we start to see the exponential benefits. All right, I feel like I've talked a lot about that, but obviously that's something that the community is particularly passionate about as we see more and more of the information. Okay. So flexible thinking. For a long time, I always, I really thought of flexible thinking as being something that our folks on the spectrum struggled the most with. But the longer I do this, the more I see this showing up all over the place. Teens struggle with flexible thinking. They really do. And folks who have been in a traumatic environment are particularly bad, and I say bad with no judgment at all, are particularly challenged by flexible thinking. And I would encourage all of us to think about all of us as somebody who has been in a particularly challenging environment for the last few years, right? Everybody is struggling more with flexibility and flexible thinking than they were just a few years ago. And for our students who, inherently have always struggled with flexible thinking, it can be incredibly difficult. And I have, this is one that I experience as a parent on a daily basis. And it's just one that I think needs to be talked about more. Okay. This is one that I don't think people are talking about this enough, right? Flexible thinking and its importance. So the first thing I want to encourage everyone to do, make unpredictability, make surprise a regular positive part of your teen's life. And let me explain what I mean by that. When a surprise or a change, right? When a demanded change in thinking or conceiving of your day or your routine, when it changes for the positive, and when it regularly changes for the positive, you can more easily begin to associate changes or, things that demand stepping out of the rigidity, things that demand being in that flexible place, enjoyable. Because so often they're not. It's a train that's not running on time, so now you have to run to the other train, or you have to be able to run to catch the bus, or it's, finding out that something you really look forward to is canceled, or it's a fire drill in the middle of the day, or it's one of those types of things. It's very often not pleasant. And the more sort of regulated we've had to get in our lives with the pandemic, we couldn't just pop over to our friends' houses, right? All of those sort of enjoyable things that involve spontaneity really sort of went away. And so more than ever, we are associating the things that demand flexible thinking from us are negative, okay? So how do we integrate positive spontaneity for our students who really genuinely struggle with flexible thinking? The first thing I want to say, and this is very much like me as a parent talking, before doing anything, make sure that you feel like you have a really comfortable understanding of where the zone of proximal development is for your child when it comes to flexibility. And the reason I say that is for some students, a serious demand of flexible thinking could be something as simple as the material that their shirt is made out of, right? It could be as simple as the type of socks that they wear, right? It can, for some of our students, or a different food, or a new food, or a new restaurant that they're going to, or even walking down a different street that they normally walk down, or taking a different route than they normally take. For many of our students, especially those who are in particularly heightened periods of anxiety, these can be really little simple things where they can sort of like practice that flexibility in a way that does not feel overwhelming. right? We want to make sure that they are experiencing it in an adaptive and joyful way. And I really want, for some of our students where, flexible thinking is maybe the primary thing that they are struggling with, it is a different pair of shoes, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. The small stuff is just as legitimate as the bigger stuff, It's not, for most of our teens, it's not going to be, a surprise vacation. That's too much, right? It's way, way, way too much. It would be way too much for me. So, we don't have a problem starting small. We say surprises like a trip to the mall. Not that New Yorkers are really mall folk, but like, something like a very little surprise, a favorite snack. They come home and they're like, the snack that they're not expecting is there. Or, having a friend over, taking a walk to the dog park, or whatever it is that feels joyful for them. One thing to know for our students who have really serious anxiety around adaptation and flexible thinking, it can actually help very much to meditate for 5 minutes before doing something that was unexpected. So finding out that an unexpected or a surprise task is happening, and then building into yourself, okay, I just got this information that I was not expecting. It's demanding flexible thinking of me. I am identifying that. I don't like that. That feels uncomfortable. Before I do anything, I'm going to take 5 minutes to meditate and reset and sort of change course. But before doing that, I'm going to clear my mind. And it's usually, most of the studies suggest 5 minutes, at least 5 minutes. And the reason I say that is our students think 30 seconds is 5 minutes. No, 5 minutes is 5 minutes. You have to really give yourself 5 minutes. And especially before an event or a time that demands flexibility. For our students who also have social anxiety, which is all of them, it's 100% of them. But for our students who are also experiencing social anxiety sort of at the same time as the flexible thinking, that 5 minutes before a particularly social event. So if you think about it, social events demand constant flexible thinking, right? Who am I talking to? What are we talking about? Who is the next person that I'm going to talk about or talk to? Like it's a constant cycle of flexible thinking. So meditating for 5 minutes before big social events can also be really helpful. This is a big one that I put in there. Expect irritation. And the reason I say it is it can be very disheartening when you are building in a surprise, like a trip to, shopping, or, going to your favorite restaurant. And the response we get from the teen is irritation, right? They're irritated. They are irritated by the demand of flexible thinking, and they're going to outwardly sort of manifest that irritation. And then that can be very disheartening because you're like, well, wait, we made plans to go to your favorite restaurant. Like, how are you irritated right now? But if you expect irritation, I think it takes some of the sting out of it, because the irritation is the flexible thinking demand. And I think if we can see it for what it is, that demand on flexible thinking, which is stressing them out, they're having a stress response, and realize that that's the source of the irritation, and we expect it to be there so it doesn't surprise us. I think that in many ways can actually be very helpful if because you are, it's a demand on flexible thinking. It's a growth, right? You're demanding growth. It's a zone of proximal development. Something is really happening for them. And you're like, I'm taking you for pizza, but something is really happening for them. It really is a demand. And so expect irritation. Expect irritation. Teenagers can be that way. And I would say that this is more important than it has ever been in the post-pandemic. I see more rigidity and more rigid thinking now than I ever have before in 12 years, by a significant margin. Students are really, really struggling with this one. Okay. And then the last one, inhibition control. How do we support inhibition control in teenagers? And I joke that this is the eternal question, but it is the eternal question. And for us, it's even more a question, okay? Something I think is very important. Assume that in the presence of peers, your teen will have reduced impulse control. Whatever their baseline of impulse control is, when they are surrounded by their peers, it is lowered. Whatever, wherever baseline is, it's going to drop when they're surrounded by their peers. Expect your teen to choose fun activities over challenging or non-pleasurable ones every single time. Expect that your teen is going to pick something that's fun or distracting or what their friends are doing every single time over that. They're just not built to make another decision. And in the case of our neurodivergent students, it can be really difficult. So have a routine way to check to see if school projects, chores, etc. are being done. The reason I say that is often, they're teenagers, they're getting older, they're taller than we are, they eat more than we do. Like they can so clearly seem like individuals that are, maintaining those things for themselves, but in many ways, cognitively, they just really need those checks. They need that routine way to check in. And it needs to be built in, because what we see a lot is parents will start to check in if school performance drops. But basically what that does is in the teen's mind, it associates if my parent is checking in, that means something's wrong or bad. But if there is a routine way that you are always, on Tuesdays, we sit down and look at IO Classroom together or Jupyter Grades together, and I know that that happens every Tuesday, regardless of my performance. It's not a judgment, it's just a routine, right? It's a real way of routinely checking in. You will likely need to discuss ways to control or eliminate distractions regularly. This is so often. We live in a perpetually distracting society, and it's only getting worse. I would say once a week, talk to your teen about how they can eliminate distractions or ways to control it on a weekly basis. What was your screen time this week? How's your meditation practice going? Those types of things. Have that conversation often.
And this kind of ties into the next point of delaying gratification, because we are living in a more digital society where the response is almost immediate. When students send out an email, they expect a response in the next 2 minutes, like texting. However, we have to condition our students to make sure that they have to expect that things aren't spontaneous. For example, TikTok videos are usually less than 60 seconds. They expect everything to be delivered in that time frame. Twitter tweets are less than 280 characters. They expect the density of the material to be that short. It's important to train our students or our children to make sure that they're able to address and take on more and able to withhold more information about their practices, rather than, oh, it's not working, I'm not going to do it, because it doesn't initiate an instant dopamine response.
Yeah. And it's just we are in an environment that is inherently antagonistic to what we're trying to do. We're trying to help our teenagers develop these things in an environment that is doing the exact opposite, which is why you will likely need to have the discussion often. I have seen my students delete all of social media from their phones, make huge progress in inhibition control, huge progress in time management. Every positive indicator, right? They're getting so much information. Their grades are going up. They feel better. They don't feel as depressed. All types of things indicating that they've made the right choice. And then 3 months later, they've downloaded it all again on their phone, and they're back to spending 2 hours a day on social media. And you have to have the conversation again, and you have to review. When we did a good job of controlling these distractions, you felt better. You said you didn't feel so insecure. You said that you stopped having such unrealistic expectations of what you were supposed to look like. Remember all of these positive things that happen? And then, and then you try again. But it's never like a one shot. You've got to go back to that conversation over and over. Okay. To help your teen delay gratification, use waiting periods for things that they want to do or have. It's always good to, if they want something, they can wait a little bit for it, for sure. And sort of, you can be completely honest about that. You can say, yeah, that's going to happen, but it's going to take some time, right? And that's okay. helping your teen to identify things that they want and then a path to earning that thing is teaching them delayed gratification and response inhibition. I just want to acknowledge that because most parents are doing that all the time. Identifying the things you want, identifying the path to getting there, to earning that thing, and then doing that. That's exactly the heart of response inhibition. Prepare your teen for situations that require impulse control by regularly reviewing your rules and your expectations in advance. And that's going to be different for every household. Different parents are going to prioritize different things, and that's perfectly all right. All that matters is that your teen have a fully developed understanding of what the expectations and rules are of your home, of the one that they, the community that they are expected to live in and progress in and thrive in. They need to really, really understand that and review it, and then review it again, and the more clear they can be, the better it is for it. Actually, it's better for the teen. And then this is one that you might not expect, but it has been shown that spending time in nature or low artificial stimulation environments, so a park, really a park, but like a park where your phone is in your pocket, not a park where your phone is, glued to your eyes, but spending time in those environments and practicing mindfulness have actually, there's significant benefits in terms of inhibition control. A lot of times you'll see people talk about it as creating what's called the pause. Creating the pause basically means is you're creating that moment when you're not in mind, you're not in an active meditation practice, but because you have that practice, in those moments where you have to demonstrate impulse control, you're making a decision very quickly about whether or not, to go there. Having that pause can be instrumental. And I just, for us adults, we have very different inhibition control centers, and how inhibition control looks in an adult life is very, very different than in a teen life. But this is something that you can really do with your kids, going on a hike, walking through the park, sitting somewhere with lots of trees or sitting by the river, things like that. Low artificial stimulation environments can also be really good for you. So this can be a wonderful thing to do together because we all benefit from this, right?
And the last point of being in nature, it's actually a prescription that's prescribed by Canadian doctors in parts of the northern United States, that you should go into nature. It's a prescription of going to nature, and not only does it improve inhibition control, but it also decreases stress levels that a lot of our children experience, I'm sure, at this point. And it really allows them to take back and appreciate a different environment compared to the urban city life that many of them are used to.
Mm-hmm. And for our students, I keep going back to it, but ADHD and spectrum and things like that, the constant barrage of the urban jungle is a lot. New York is an environment where there really are very high demands in how much stimuli you are expected to process at any given moment. And having a break from that can feel really good. And again, when we say, expect irritation, the idea of going on a hike or the idea of going to a forest might not seem like the coolest thing in the world, but it will have demonstrably positive effects on the individual, which will make them more open to the experience. Some of our students will absolutely love it. I mean, we have students who go on outward bound trips for 3 weeks in the summer. They go into the Grand Canyon, they do all kinds of things. Some of our students will take to this very, very quickly. Our gamer students, our students who are more online, sometimes are a little bit less enthusiastic about that. Just putting that out there. Okay. So from here, just in terms of discussion and Q&A, I went a little long because I always go a little long, but I did just want to make sure that folks have time to talk to one another and time to ask questions. Wait, hold on. Oh, I'm opening the chat. He's telling me to open the chat. I am opening the chat. I think I'm going to actually stop screen sharing too, just so that we can see some more faces. Hi guys. Hello. There you are. But yeah, so we can do this a bunch of different ways. People want to unmute and talk to us. That's great. If you feel more comfortable, typing questions. I'm just reviewing the chat for like the first time. Oh,
Cory,
okay, that's a really good question.
Questions from the chat to you?
Wait, say that again, hon.
Would you like the questions asked to you from the chat?
Oh, no, that's not necessary. I will read them out loud if that's okay to you guys, so that everybody knows what I'm doing. So which is the most important area to focus on first, if all three are compromised? And my answer would be a two-parter for this one. You know your teen really well. So if one of those three categories seems to be the category that is creating the most distress or the challenge or the highest sort of area of challenge for your young person, I would say, let that guide you. Another thing you can consider is which practices overlapped the most. So for example, taking breaks into non-stimulating environments like nature and things like that, and a meditation practice are very beneficial for all three. So you can start in that way. The other thing you can do is you can have a conversation with your student, just like the conversation we're having right now, and ask them what they want to work on. And they will almost always have a good answer for you. They're feeling it. Like they know they're feeling it. And so sometimes the best thing we can do is say, so here are these parts, right? Like this is compromised for everyone right now post-pandemic, but it's especially compromised for us neurodivergent folks. For a lot of us, especially for our students with ADHD, there's a huge genetic component. Often we as adults also have ADHD. So we can have that conversation from like a place from that and say, what's going on for you? These are some of the things that I've noticed for me, or these are some of the things that other adults have noticed who are experiencing this. And what would you like to do? The more that they are in the driver's seat, the better. And that's just, I can't say that enough. The more that they feel that they are the ones sort of designing the approach and the progress and things like that, the better. Even if they're just repeating what you just said, that's perfectly fine because they're feeling that ownership, right? So that's a very long answer for a very specific question, but I would say, think about the practices that are the highest leverage that show up that, your teen might enjoy. Think about the things in your family life that would be really helpful. Maybe having a surprise trip to a really nice restaurant is something that their siblings would really like too. And so it makes sense for the family to start integrating that because, it's good for everybody. So you have to sort of like think about what you want and what your teen wants the most.
A sense of agency is how I would summarize the argument. Allow the child to have a sense of agency, especially in a time when everything feels like it's out of their control. Teenagers are at that age gap where they feel they're young enough to not be respected, but old enough to have responsibilities now. And they're in this interim and they feel awkward in this place where they feel like everything is against them and that they have no say in anything. So having a sense of agency and being able to develop their voice is crucial to raising them.
Yeah. And some of them, I also think some of the practices are more like obvious. So for example, the next question is about how many times you have to do a routine for it to go into that road place, right? And that is a way less fun than the surprise trip to the mall, right? Like those are very different things. And so being aware of that and realizing that some of this is going to really feel like work and some of it's like I feel less like work.
To address the question about practice, think of it as a series. It's a progression, and I like giving video game analogies because that's what my students respond to. So I'll give it to pretend there's like this really big task that you have to do, and that the task could take several weeks. So at each point during the week, you hit a milestone. They should be able to consistently perform to that milestone at that part of the week or throughout their progression. And as they progress further and further more, you move the progression point or the milestone forward As a result, students are able to, and if they fall back one day, that's okay, as long as they're consistent. When it comes to developing routine, consistency is the most important attribute that one must focus on. It doesn't matter if they could do it once. If they could do it once, then sure, maybe lucky once. However, they have to be able to do it again and again and again and again.
And so when we're talking about building rote routines, just so that we kind of like will understand what that might look like. Walk in, keys, MetroCard, phone, go here. You sit, and this is gonna sound like a lot, but it's true. You sit in this spot in the apartment that is like a low distraction spot, and you do this particular subject for 45 minutes, right? In that order. And you start with that subject, and it's that, you know, and oftentimes I would suggest the subject that they don't like, or the subject that they have the most homework in, because that's the thing that they're going to put off. And then the procrastination is going to create sort of like a self-loathing cycle. So
also the comment on using yet at the end of the sentence, that's very good because it promotes a growth mindset for the students. Students, when they feel like they don't do well on something, I'm sure we've heard this many times. It's like, oh, I just don't know how to do it, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't know, and they give up and they stop doing it completely. If we condition them that grades are not the end all be all, that learning is the process behind it, then they will respond better to learning without the fear of consequences. Now, granted, I know Stuyvesant parents and Stuyvesant families are always concerned, and teachers and students, everyone involved, always concerned about, I need to get a 95, or I need to get a 92, or I just want my child to get a high grade. And that rubs off to the students, where they end up caring more about the results rather than the process going through it. And as a result, when they don't pay attention to the process or the progression behind it, they are unable to emulate the progression that they did to get to the end result when they're only tunneled on that end result. They won't be able to repeat the successes if they only focus on the end result.
Okay, so, all right, hold on. I just want to make sure that we
Scroll down.
Yeah. Okay, so getting back to the original question of how much practice does it take to make a routine rote? If that information is going to come from the teen. And the reason I say it's going to come from the teen is they have to do it enough. They have to do it enough times that they feel that they no longer have to think about it, right? That really is the bar that we're trying to reach. So when the phone and the MetroCard and the keys go into the bowl that's in the set place, the question that has to be asked, and we've all experienced this, is, did that happen routinely? Like, did that happen without you having to use any of your thought process, any of your brain power to make that thing happen? And if it has, then fantastic, it's rote. Now, just to address the question of like whether or not these things are being taught by STI teachers, the classroom environment is built around these things, right? When we give out an assignment guide, it breaks down the different aspects of the project. When we are doing, different things, the educational environment is often set up to do these things, which is why for today's presentation, we really focused on the things that students are doing at home, right? So these are the things, these are the types of practices to integrate into a household, right? Because realistically, yes, actually we do have like a mindfulness unit in our PE classes, but if we teach English and social studies, we certainly have moments where we will transition and encourage students to transition and walk them through that and guide them through that. But we're obviously meeting the content demands. We're prepping students for AP exams. We are doing all of those things. And if you are feeling, overwhelmed, if it's like, well, I don't know which practice to integrate first, I would say start small, see if there can be a family meditation practice, right? Or see if there can be, if you can sit down and listen to a guided meditation for 20 minutes, or can you, as a family, go for a walk through the park? What types of things do you feel will benefit your family as a whole and will benefit you? And I'm very, the there's a lot that we talk about, especially in the ADHD community and things like that, where, you know, the parents are often putting in place the exact same practices that their students are putting in place. And on one level, it can be very frustrating because you're like, well, wait a second, like I have the thing, I am the thing. And that can be very frustrating, but it can also be very rewarding because the types of things that you are guiding, you can begin to model, and you can model for your child in a way that a parent who is neurotypical still can, but like it's different, right? It's got a little bit of it. There's a little bit of a difference there. And I do want to really say, on one level, it's so challenging, but on another level, it can be very, very rewarding because as you start putting these practices in place, you can do that together, and that can be really, really powerful. Demonstrating to your child how to have a household that is not perpetually overly stimulating or artificially stimulating. You can, and this is, I mean, I work on this every day. You can model your relationship to your phone, right? Like what is that? Like, and it's really genuinely difficult. But I think part of why we feel so overwhelmed and why we feel like we're never doing enough is we don't recognize how much we're doing when we're doing it, right? If you are teaching your child how to identify the things that they want and what they have to do to get those things, and you're having those conversations, you are teaching inhibition control, right? If you are putting on like nice classical music while you clean the apartment, you are sort of demonstrating how to create, an enjoyable rote routine. You have to clean the counter, but you can make that enjoyable. If you can demonstrate positive, flexible thinking, I find it very, very difficult to be spontaneous. But in being spontaneous in a way that I can make sure is enjoyable and manageable for the student, I'm also integrating it into my practice, right? And then I'm a happier person and I'm a better person, right? So it on one level, yes, I hear it. And it is, there are so many articles written about, what it is to be an ADHD mother with an ADHD son and an ADHD daughter, what it is to be on the spectrum and have students on the spectrum, and what that means. And minimizing it makes no sense whatsoever. But I do think we can think about it in a positive way. Okay. Oh, in terms of whether or not we plan to present this to teachers, we've already started to present to teachers about, different aspects of ADHD and spectrum and things like that. We are looking, hopefully, to grow the department and hoping to reach out on more of a department level. So what these different things can look like depending on different disciplines, because it is very, very different depending on, the discipline. The way it looks in an English class is very different than how it looks in a lab or how it looks in a theater class or whatever it is. And so we do want to get more department based. But I think it is important just to know that this is a part of teacher training for anyone. Everyone sort of gets this. I think that we want to make sure that it's part of our ongoing development in our department, that we continue to bring the information that we get to other departments. And that's just a long-term sort of always goal. I call that sort of the always goal of staying up to date on this information and then turnkeying it to our department. Okay, wait, hold on real quick. I just want to make sure. Sorry. Okay, yes. Okay, is there a way to help normalize their challenges? My son says, I keep wanting to set him on a blind date, but he would be great to bring the students with similar accommodations together somehow. Yeah, I mean, we are working, absolutely. And I do want to just say one thing. Having taught pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, students are like struggling with social, right? Just to be social in a way that they never have, like this. And I hate doing the like unique moment in history thing, because as a parent, you're like, great, thanks, I'm super lucky. And there's like, it just feels very, very frustrating. But that is where we are. And some like really basic stuff of just like having a long extended conversation in person can be very, very exhausting to our teens. And in one way, we are thrilled to have, like, we had a book about neurodivergence in our book club. We are trying very hard to get a neurodivergent club up and sort of off the ground. We have one student in particular who is an upperclassman who's interested in leading it. But you know, college application is also a lot, and so it's sort of like getting teens to really want to put that much time in can be very tough. But we are trying to get a neurodivergent club off the ground. I think that would be obviously hugely beneficial. We are trying to bring more and more information to our students. One thing I will say that's very positive, especially here at Stein, more than any place I've ever been, the students are interested in being educated about twice exceptional. The population of neurodivergent students in environments of high intellectual gifts like STI is much higher than it would be anywhere else, right? We see around those really high IQ points, we start seeing significantly more neurodivergence. And so we do have a student population that just has a very different outlook in the sense of they want to know more about it. Like they think that the mind is an incredibly interesting thing. They want to sort of think and understand how other very intelligent people think and understand. And there's also sort of an unspoken understanding that these are the individuals they're going to be working with. If you are working in a high intellectual field, your likelihood of working with neurodivergent coworkers gets higher and higher and higher. And they understand that. So there is like an actual investment on the student body's part of sort of knowing and understanding the human mind in a far less sort of like rigid, and I use that word intentionally, rigid sort of neurotypical closed box way of thinking about how people are and how they behave and how they think.
And students are a lot kinder nowadays.
That's
They've been very welcoming and warm, especially when you have students who maybe quote on and off. I'm using this with quotes. I don't want this to be
there's
very
scare quotes.
off. The students are understanding they're more willing to help them. A lot of our students nowadays are realizing that it's not a one-on-one, mission to take something, to do something, but they're starting to realize it's a lot of group and collaborative work that our school is building. Every single class that I'm in, that I teach in, has some sort of group collaboration or discussion based, and they're paired up with different people from different skill levels, whether they have a disability or not. And this really reveals, and this, of course, culture change doesn't happen in 1 year, nor will it ever happen in 5 years. But it is something that is actively being worked on and actively on the mind, in the forefront of teacher practice and teacher minds in the school.
Yeah, and I do want to stress, because we're going to go and teach, like we are in the classrooms every day, all day, and there is the emphasis on group work and group projects has never been higher. And in some ways that's fantastic because it's teaching the collaborative model. And then in another way, we have to be mindful that our students have a lot of flexible thinking demands when they're in group projects and things like that. So those are also sort of like high demand areas. So it's rewarding because the social piece is there, but it can also be very exhausting. And they might need to meditate and look at the river. Like and knowing that is okay.
As for college applications, I don't know if that's changed since, but I know there's a website portal that all STI uses called Naviance. And Naviance, I believe it's, and the college counselor can correct me if I'm wrong later, but I believe Naviance centralizes all the due dates, any applications that still need to be submitted, unless Common App is still being used. But we would have to talk more to the college counselor to ascertain more information.
Yeah, and I do, for that in particular, I want to very much endorse talking to parents about it as much as you can. And the reason I put that out there is early on in this year, I had a short conversation with a few different STI parents. And in that short conversation, I got so much information about, when they went on college tours, which colleges seemed like they understood neurodivergence and that was something that they were invested in, which colleges felt, antagonistic. Why? What felt right? And the reason I say that is, one, it's constantly changing. And two, there's nothing quite like having been at a university to know sort of how they actually handle those things. My alma mater, I went to Washington University in St. Louis. My alma mater is notorious for not accepting neurodivergence and not taking measures to normalize it on campus and being sort of behind that. And that has been true for 15 years. For other places, they have done a tremendous amount of work in the last 5 years and they've come huge, they've made huge progress, leaps and bounds. So it definitely there. So
to answer the question about, is there a plan to add special education to information to the main STI website? So currently we're in the progress of continuing to edit the website. But one thing is that the school is actively, I don't like using the word labeling, but actively showing that we have special ed teachers. For example, I've been at STI for the last 3 years and I was always the social studies teacher. However, this year, with the special education demands, they updated my title on the STI website to say social studies and special education.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to show that there is a presence of special education at STI, and we'll continue to expand on that presence as we progress forward.
But I love that. I would love for that. I mean, I could no more design a website that I could do a handstand, but I love the idea of, of increasing that presence. I am all about it. Oh,
if I
hold
could
on.
follow, could I follow up? That was my question.
I'm gonna turn the volume up. Hold on one second. It's my fault. Hold, please. Okay, go ahead. Would you mind starting over?
Yeah, sorry. I just
Thank you.
I was just saying that I would love to follow up. That was my question on the chat about the website, and I wanted to say I just don't think that labeling is a problem, and the disability community is very vocal about being disabled is not a bad word, and that saying that Stuyvesant offers and being outright about offering special education services, that is not an insult, and that or shouldn't be offensive to anybody. But I and the fact is that middle school parents are wondering. We receive those parents of current students. We get asked questions. Does Stuyvesant offer special education services? Does Stuyvesant offer ICT for students with ICT placement? And I feel that information, I'm happy to talk to parents, but I feel that information should be publicly available, because there is a need for middle schoolers who are making school decisions to have that information available to them.
I think that's absolutely true. I feel strongly that learning disability is not a bad word at STI. Neurodivergence is talked about often. I have been in a lot of different educational environments, and I really feel that STI has truly embraced neurodivergence in a way that I'm really, really happy with. I don't think anybody is shying away from learning disability or neurodivergence and things like that. I definitely love the idea of updating any website. I think just perpetually updating the website. That being said, obviously a tremendous amount of work goes into that, and it's not work I understand, so I don't know if I want to speak to it. I will say that we are very much trying to undo this concept that specialized high schools or elite learning environments and as a whole, don't have special education. I had to have a conversation the other day, which I said, no, Stuyvesant High School is a public high school. This is a public high school. This is a public high school. And so, I do think that my son is in a talented and gifted program, and there's this idea that in those programs, X, Y, and Z doesn't exist, or you can't be, blah, blah, blah. And I do think we need to work. And we've actually talked explicitly to several of our middle schools where we tend to get more students from those schools. Not that there's any school that's like ordained as the feeder, but there are definitely schools that we see more students from. We've already started those conversations of, don't tell families that you
To
can't have,
declassify.
yeah, don't tell families to declassify. Don't tell families that IEPs don't exist in special education, or special education doesn't exist in elite educational environments, because the chances that we have a student with ADHD or a student on the spectrum are significantly higher than a non-specialized environment. And so we have started to do that. It's frustrating work. I mean, there's no question. It's frustrating work as a parent. It's frustrating work as a student. But we just have to keep having those conversations.
Also,
Yeah.
before I have to leave to teach, these conversations are becoming more prevalent and open. For example, at the last Stuyvesant open house, when parents had the opportunity to walk around and go to any part of the school if they wanted to, I talked to several parents about special education, and I was the representative of special ed there. And they were asking me questions like, "Oh, do we do IEPs?" And I'm like, "Of course we do."
Yeah,
IEPs.
but it has. I think the significant effort needs to be made because not so long ago, I can tell you from personal experience, pre-pandemic, when my student visited an open house, and he said that he had an IEP with ICT placement, and he was told, but I don't know who the person was in charge at that time, but he was explicitly told, we don't do that at Stuyvesant. And that's still the popular belief in much of the
Yeah.
population out there.
I think that's absolutely
Yeah,
true.
beliefs
We
will
do.
beliefs will change.
Beliefs will change.
Beliefs will change,
Yeah.
and it takes time for us to make sure, because it's a team of two so far. So it's really hard
But
for
we're
us to get.
hiring.
We are hiring. We are trying to push the message. I'm trying to get.
Yeah, no, I know.
If
Well,
I
we are
could
trying
add
to push
that
the message.
Yeah.
during the
Okay.
open house
All right,
that
he's
I
gonna
came to,
run. Just a heads up. This is an ongoing conversation, and I'm happy to set up. If anybody wants to email me, I'm actually gonna put my email in the chat. So if you want to email me, you've got that there. I mean, I have emailed with many folks that are here on this call, but if you want to, I can definitely get back to you that way or set something up. I think if we've got time for one more question, and then if it's okay, I'm going to sign off because I got to go teach history. Mr. Patras, do you want to ask a question?
yes, thanks, Ms. Coleman, for the great work with our students. And my question is regarding students that have IEPs, and we do have one in our family and has some executive functioning issues and all the stuff that you've been discussing. To what extent do you think that Stuyvesant should offer equity to these students, and in terms of placement for AP courses, which have a very high hurdle, 94% subject averages, 92 overall averages, and with having these executive functioning issues, these averages are often impossible to reach, even though you've shown strong improvements, but impossible to reach. How can you differentiate some IEP students from being just a number when they apply to the AP courses that are so hard to get into?
Yeah, I mean, I don't, that the AP thing is really not my area. We have certainly ongoing conversations about the criteria. It is established at the department level. We certainly have a significant number of students who take APs. I've got students with IEPs who are freshmen who I very much anticipate, they will be taking APs, and we've got upperclassmen who are in AP classes. And in fact, trying to support some of the AP science classes is one of the harder things in my job. But I absolutely hear what you're saying, which is that there are these astronomical numbers, and it can feel unattainable. One thing I would say is, in general, I think there's a huge placement on these AP classes, and then they get to their university, and the university acknowledges like one AP, and they just miss all the others and they don't use them. But so I will say, in general, the emphasis on AP at STY is something that I would like everyone to kind of interrogate a little more, right? The obsession with APs. But I also get it. It's a high performance environment, right? So the first thing I would say is recommendations do play a large role. So we have, teachers who go above and beyond and write recommendations for students with lower numbers if they're displaying, a certain dedication, a certain aptitude I have one student with an IEP, you know, whose parent is on this call, and the aptitude for history is incredible, right? And there's like incredible aptitude there. So, you know, there really is, we really do have students who have those types of gifts. I hear that the AP situation is incredibly frustrating. You know, we have more students who qualify than we have seats, and that's only getting more so, right? Like this year in particular, I know looking at the different departments, there were so many more students that qualified for AP than there were for seats and things like that. I don't have a wonderfully great answer that will make, you know, the AP process not stressful. I think it is incredibly stressful. I will say we continue to push, and we've already seen an increase in the role of teacher recommendations, and we continue to sort of stress that. But that being said, I have, you know, there's no way for me to have every department eliminate the GPA. You know, that is a tough one. I very much so much want to be able to answer everybody's questions, and I do wish that I could stay on. I am officially late to my class. So if it's okay with you guys, if you would mind, if it's okay with you, if you would mind emailing, I will get back to you as quickly as possible, or we can do a phone call. And I'm also happy to set up like a Zoom type thing for any individual parent or any group of parents. If we want to schedule like a follow-up, I'm happy to do this. And my hope is that this becomes routine. You know, I'd like to do this. This is one of my favorite parts of my job. So I would like to do this often. And I would like to set something up consistently, because I think having these conversations is just very, very, very important, because it's very easy to feel like you're the only one. Okay, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. And yeah, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Okay, bye guys.